But let me just give you a kind of meta picture. And for all of you who are already familiar with India, this is going to be a bit, a bit basic. But India, as you might know, is a land of incredible diversity. It's a place where language changes every 200 kilometers, food habits, clothing, and it's also geographically very varied. We have the Himalayas, we have tropical forests, we have incredible rainfall, we've got deserts, and we have the oceans as well. So this incredibly varied climatic condition also coupled with culture and other aspects of living produced in the past architectural types that have been incredibly unique, depending on which part of the country you're in. It's completely different, and it's a kind of language and heritage that we work with in India on a daily basis. But to talk about the role of the architect, I think it's also interesting to see the trajectory of the Indian architect since independence, where we went from being parts of the nation-building frenzy post 1947, when India got independence, working with an extremely kind of modernist view of development, to a point where in the middle section, we were with political turmoil, again, losing some of the mandate that we had in the belief that we could be partners in the building of the nation, to finally being post-liberalization in the 90s, when the economy opened up, becoming mere service providers, and really just kind of catering to the intense demand of building real estate for the IT industry, for instance. To a point now where there has been a fair amount of time that's passed, and you now start seeing practices in India starting to also take on mandates that we've been disconnected for a while. And I'm going to show through the first part of my presentation, which is about my own practice, the kind of models of practice that we are kind of engaging through. So when I talk about models of practice, it's also coming from the fact that the diversity, not just of the physical environment, but also of the economic status, the kind of places that you work in. There can't be a single model of practice that would address all of these challenges, and which is why this is all, of course, in retrospect, and it's in hindsight that one thinks that there are 4 models that have emerged within my own practice. The first one is, of course, very traditional. It's the idea of someone coming to you to give you a project, and then you work with the person to produce a project. Here, in this case, it's up in the north. It's a house that's built out of timber screens that open and close, and it's located in this kind of peri-urban part of a northern city, and it's symptomatic of other such development throughout the country as well, where the architecture also tends to become a marker for development that is to come. Or this idea of the collaborative practice, where when you often work in places where there are various actors who have a lot more, let's say, a lot more skin in the game. You're constantly working with people to produce projects. In this case, a temple that we actually built with local villagers out of stone, where the villagers would work on this project in their spare time. So between tilling fields, they'd come back, and in their off-season, when they weren't doing farming, they were physically building this community temple project. This is in some sense a collaborative. So we played not just the role of the architect, and this is not the architect in the traditional sense. It's someone who's kind of working with the villagers, with the priests, to actually produce the design as well as the actual project itself. And the third aspect of the practice is this idea of the collective. What's happened also is that the urban condition within India has gotten extremely contested because of burgeoning real estate prices. So for instance, in Mumbai, which is some of the most expensive real estate in the world, we often have developers pricing out certain population groups, but also the state many times thinks about development potential of the land at the expense of the benefit of all citizenry. And what we found is that there are models of practice that operate with these citizen groups to now produce space within what is extremely contested and valuable space, but looking at it through the idea of the commons. And this is from the Seoul Biennale, where we were actually looking at documenting some of these practices in the city. This is also a group which I'm a part of, called the Bandra Collective, that looks at the design of public space that happens in the city of Mumbai. So we do, there are 6 practices that engage with the municipality and the local politicians, as well as the local resident groups, to look at spaces that might have been marginalized and that we can bring back into the imagination of the everyday. So this is a promenade that we worked on. So this is, at many times, this is work that is coming through our engagement with resident groups. And the idea of the collective is that while this work is pro bono, what it allows us to do is distribute the costs across 6 practices, so it becomes something that is feasible to do. We also work as advocates for bringing into the public imagination the kinds of big infrastructure projects that are happening in Mumbai. In this case, the coastal road, which has, disconnected the city completely from the ocean. And what we were doing at that point was trying to show, before the project was done, what is the kind of physical presence that kind of infrastructure would have vis-a-vis the city and the ocean. And lastly, the 4th model that we've been working through is this idea of research. And typically what happens in our context is that research is seen as something academic and not really connected to practice. And what we've been doing really is research that is looking at housing and housing type, as well as building code in a way that it can inform both policy and hence inform practice as well. So that's really the kind of models of practice that we operate through. The second part of the presentation is really looking at questions that we've been asking ourselves in the practice, and looking at how these questions play out within the value propositions that we need to address across many projects, but also specifically in the few that I'm going to show. The first one is how lightly can you actually touch the ground? The fact that you're working with resources that are extremely valuable and will keep becoming more and more scarce. Is there a way for us to actually start looking at, through various techniques, to try and lessen the load that natural resources would be consumed on particular projects? This is a small community center project that we've done in rural Maharashtra, which is in the western part of India. It's situated in this kind of grove of trees right next to a factory. And it's for the residents of the villages around, but also of the people who actually work in the factory. That's the actual site, and it's this beautiful grove of trees. And when the client first suggested that we work on that site, we were a little apprehensive because of the number of trees on the site, and we were wondering if there was a way for us to actually build without impacting a single tree, and what would the connection between that grove and the actual project be. And I think it was an interesting kind of experience when we were sitting within the guest house that client had, where you were sitting in a covered courtyard, but when you sat inside that courtyard, you were able to see through that sliver that operates at the top between the 2 roofs, the actual foliage of the trees beyond. And that, in some sense, led us to this idea of trying to connect visually with the trees, even when you're inside the project, inside the building. The building itself is divided into 4 parts. There is a kind of administrative block. There is a spiritual meditation center. There is a skill development center, and there are residential blocks around 2 courtyards. We worked extensively with the local residents, showing them ideas of what we were planning to do, and there was intense discussion. We brought in a group called Hunarshala. I think about 2005, they won the Curry Stone Prize. They are essentially working with developing material systems with local craftsmen. So we brought them in to consult on the project. because we wanted to build with rammed earth. That was our kind of ambition on the project. But after our initial kind of tests, we found that we needed too much cement to actually stabilize the rammed earth, and eventually had to look for another material, which we then found in this stone quarry, volcanic basalt stone quarry, where during the quarrying process, you actually have basalt stone dust that's produced as a byproduct. So what we wanted to do was use all that stone dust and build rammed walls of stone dust. We tested those samples, they worked out wonderfully, and the entire ecosystem of that material, of the material ecology, then started revolving around the fact that we were trying to reduce the amount of resource that we would use. So waste stone dust was one of them, and you can see some of those test walls going up. And the entire superstructure was built out of wood that was recycled from ship-breaking yards close to where we were at. So it's basically a place where old ships are taken apart, and all the wood and all the materials actually kind of taken off of that and recycled. So this was an entire process that we went through to get the wood, and it's excellent wood. It's really good quality because it's seasoned, in salt water, and that stuff got transported to site. We worked with the carpenters to actually develop the entire roof system. This area that we were building in gets extremely hot. It goes to up to 50 degrees centigrade during the summers. So what we were then doing is basically figuring out ways of insulating against that heat. And what you see here are waste jute bags, which were then shredded, and then through a process of wrapping the jute bags around little sticks with straw and mud. We produce these mud rolls, and they're sun-dried and then become an insulation layer below the actual roof itself. And clay tiles that actually sit on top. So this actually reduces the temperature within the project by at least 7 to 8 degrees during the summers. And the floor is built out of a combination of dung, cow dung, which is a disinfectant, and mud and cement, and that's something that happens every 6 months, which also kind of builds an economic link between the residents in that area who have to do this every 6 months or so. So this becomes a project that, in some sense, also ties back to the community in the way that it's operated and maintained over time. Those are images of the final project. You can see the rammed stone dust walls. You can also see in this image the wood superstructure, or the recycled wood. And the central gutter is really the concrete beam that these structures sit on. So there's very little rainfall, so every single drop of water that falls on the site needs to be harvested and then recycled. And these are images during the construction of the project. Here you can see the underside of the roof and the wood and the way that it supports the entire superstructure. And this is the image that we started off with, the idea that you could be inside the space, yet link with the entire site that you're on, see the foliage of the trees while you sit inside. And these are the courtyards in between. So it also became, in some sense, a community space, not just inside the building, but also in the spaces in between. And that's just an image of how it's being used. The second question that we've also kind of asked ourselves is how do you work with history? And given the fact that in India there is so much history that you encounter through built fabric, at almost every turn, what is the way that you can learn from history? This is a project that we built in close to the desert on the western part of India. It's a hostel. And it's built in a space where the kind of architecture that traditionally was built out of stone was like this. It's extremely sensitive to the heat of the area, and it works really wonderfully with micro shading and other ways of mitigating the harsh summer sun. There is a kind of development form of the house that goes from the village module to the top, which is just 3 rooms around, surrounded by a kind of wall, to the final city house, which sits at the bottom there, and then kind of coalesces into the city fabric in the town of Jaisalmer that is also close by. And yet, despite this incredibly intelligent way of building, the new cities that are being built in this area are like this, right? So there is absolutely no connection between what was built in the past and what's being built right now as modern habitation. And it was such a site that we were actually given for the project, and which was for a student hostel. This particular town is a center for students from all over the country to come to study for the engineering, centralized engineering exams, very, very coveted, very tough exams to kind of study for. And the entire economy is driven by hostel accommodation for these students. There are about 200,000 students every year who migrate to this place to study for those centralized exams. What also happens because of this intense kind of movement and the fact that it's almost, these hostels are almost like warehouses for students, there is an extremely high rate of student suicides and the highest number of student suicides in the country. And that's also because of the pressure of the exams, yes, but the kind of architecture that they inhabit is extremely unsympathetic to the kind of pressures that they have and doesn't allow for any kind of social space as well. So what we were trying to do then is trying to see if the block that we were working with could also in some sense work with porosity to allow for various social spaces to form and also work climatically. There is kind of precedent to this in the way that the traditional Havelis were built with a central courtyard. What you also see on the left is an image of a miniature painting depicting these multiple terraces and shaded spaces that people in the 17th century would inhabit. And what we were trying to draw on the right-hand side is ways that we would be able to manifest that within our project as well. And so, like I said, we were trying to build within this entire really dense fabric, but at the same time, to see if we could produce kind of porosity that would allow for air to move through, as well as produce spaces for social interaction. And that is the project. What you see here on the left is the entry into the project, and all of the rooms that are structured around a central courtyard are the ones where the students stay. It also learns from traditional modes of fenestrations, which include these micro-perforations that cool air to allow for natural ventilation in the building. And we extrapolated that to produce the entire building, the facade, which is about 3 feet thick, that allows us to mitigate some of the harsh heat conditions that we face. It also creates a kind of interesting relationship. The terraces create an interesting relationship with the street and the ability to communicate across the section, which is a dominant feature in a lot of our older towns. These are just some details of that the building skin and the facade, and that's the entry into the main courtyard. Like I said, it's structured around an entire courtyard in the middle and rooms that open on all sides. Which is also a kind of climatic device that's existed in this part of the country for ages. And you can see here that it works as a kind of shaded social space, but also as a climatic device to allow for hot air to kind of move through, while creating these kind of sectional conditions for allowing people to see each other and interact across floors as well. And yeah, these are just images of the courtyard that's looking back up. And the idea of the section as a kind of connector between various spaces, and the ability for people to make connections that hopefully would also promote some kind of community connect for them at points when they're in duress during taking exams and so on and so forth. And these are just images of the rooms. And that is the fabric that you're building in, and that's our building on the right-hand side. Another question that we are also kind of dealing with is how do you do more with less, given the fact that very often when we are building in some of these conditions in the peri-urban parts of the country, the access to materials is very limited, but concrete also becomes the default material for building anything, because there is this perception of it being a permanent construction material, but also it's very easy to move around, doesn't require great skill to do cast in situ construction in many parts. So when we were building this project, which is a temple in southern India, it was being built right next to a cement plant, and the client was the owner of the plant, and they wanted us to build a temple as outreach for the surrounding villages. But we didn't want to build out of cement, given the fact that we were also building in an area where stone was in abundance. What we also studied when we actually looked at that site was that there were a lot of farmers in that space who had changed the kind of crops they used to grow because the water table had dramatically reduced. But what we also found was that the cement plant itself used water to quarry for all of the limestone that they needed to produce the cement, and all of that water evaporated. And what we did was then try to develop an entire water management system where the temple then became not just a religious place, but it also became a place for us to think about articulating water as a part of the temple and looking at groundwater recharge and also supplying water back to the farmers that lived there. And this is not really a new thing. It's something that's been traditionally done within India through the relationship that water and land have had in both cities, but also as water bodies within temple precincts. And that's really what we were trying to kind of do here. And what we were trying to also see is if there was a way that we could use a single corbel or a step to produce the entire project, both from the idea of the water body and the entire body of the temple itself. And then what we were also working with was traditional planning principles of the temple itself and the actual kind of geometries that are needed. But what you see here is just a kind of plan that talks about the main deity, that talks about the kind of priest's quarters, the kitchen, and so on and so forth. And that's really a diagram that shows the kind of dynamic of how the water gets pushed into this low-lying area around a temple. So, and it becomes a place where you can actually bathe before you go into the temple. All of the water is phytoremediated with planting that happens along its edge. And that's the final project. It's built out of a black limestone that's from the area. That's the cement plant in the distance, and the project's at the bottom there. And you can see how the water is kind of harvested and held in that pond to recharge groundwater, but also whatever excess water is collected here is then kind of let off into the fields for the farmers to again have access to a water management system that had died out. So we use those old channels to again to revitalize the entire farming community. So it's as much a water management project as much as it is a religious project. So, and then we kind of built these corbels out of those black limestone that were also filled with earth and had grass, not only to mitigate some of the heat gain that you would have, but also and to kind of produce a cool interior, but also to look at erasing some of that boundary between what is sacred and what is of everyday use. So you actually have people sitting on the steps of the temple, of the body of the temple, which is unusual, and it's something that works really well for us in this particular project. And yeah, these are just some images of the project with relation to the water, and that's the interior of the temple. So it's basically corbelled up to a point where the keystone is the skylight, so that kind of holds the entire structure of the project in place. The next question that we were asking ourselves is also about technology and about how with this abundant craft that we have in our country, how do you actually work with that craft, not in a way that looks to museumify the process, but really to extend its abilities to respond to the time that we are working with and also the kind of access to tools that you have. This is a building that we've done in Hyderabad. It's a residential building. It's planned such that you actually have cross ventilation through all of the apartments. But the client came to us to build this project after they'd already gotten zoning permits for a particular size of the envelope. And we were really then starting to wonder what we could do with the edge of the building. And what you see here really is what we were trying to do, trying to see if we could create a building edge that also became structural, that took the load of the sunbreakers, stone sunbreakers that would go up above the openings. We, of course, drew all of that up. We had these complex, these are outputs from Rhino and Grasshopper to look at the kind of brick rotation that we would need and so on and so forth, and how the window module would, the bay window module would sit within the framework of that undulating facade. But how do you communicate this to a mason who doesn't read drawings coming out of a computer like that? He has tremendous skill to build with brick, but the interface between the way we draw as architects and the way that they build is completely different. So what we were also doing then in this project was designing tools for the mason to corbel the brick by the exact amount that needed to be, so that you'll be able to kind of produce the project the way that we needed for the load transfer to happen. And these are images of the work under construction, and that's the final building. So you can see how the corbel holds that white stone lintel, and how the bay window actually kind of sits within that entire armature. So as much, the building, of course, looks the way that it does, but this entire project is as much about the tools that we designed as much as it is the design of the building. And I think that's really important for us, not to kind of look at craft as something that's stuck in time, but also something that can move forward with technology. It's what Richard Sennett talks about in The Craftsman, where he talks about craft being of a particular time and not just of a moment in the past. Another project that we were actually this is a very small pavilion that we've done in Mumbai. It was supposed to be a tribute to an old Mughal 17th century hunting pavilion built out of fabric. And it's a gorgeous pavilion. It was a gorgeous pavilion that's in the museum. And what we were doing was building a kind of tribute to that. We worked with the geometry and the components of that original pavilion, and then took that apart. The space that we were presenting in was a massive volume, almost 4 floors high. And what we were then doing was basically looking at the form of the pavilion extruded up to the height that we were sitting in. And this was up for about 2 weeks, and we obviously kind of unfolded that entire fabric. We panelized it so that you were able to get the exact sizes that you would need, and then kind of stitch. But the thing is, the entire project was built by 2 tailors. Very commonplace, people who stitch clothes. Just 2 tailors and a Singer sewing machine. That took all of the panels, stitched them together, and then very simple details of hooking those the fabric panels, tensioning them onto these little rods at the bottom, and that's the final project. The other question that we've been kind of always asking ourselves is, how do you define context, given the fact that we're building a project in a particular place. There would be a context of the immediate environments that we build within. But there are also knowledge networks that we sit in, which also now start talking about context that goes beyond the geographical boundaries of what your site is restricted to. This is a small project. That's a library that we've done, again, in rural Maharashtra. It was for a small school. This is from 2017, I think. What we were trying to ask is, what would kids interface with more? Would they prefer a kind of building, or would landscape? I mean, even as an adult, if I see a mound of grass, I want to kind of walk over it rather than looking at just a building, right? So what we were trying to do was then look at how do we create a landscape that could be a kind of architectural building. And while we rendered whatever we did, we went back into history to start looking at ways that free-form architectural vaults were done. And we actually looked at the final kind of, let's say, knowledge system was a combination of the tile vaulting system from 16th century Spain. Gustavino details Dieste's details from 1960s that he was working with in Uruguay. At that point, Rhino Volt had just come out, so we used Rhino Volt to calculate the stability of the entire structure. And we used brick tile from a local manufacturer in India and built this project in Maharashtra. So this also kind of speaks or questions the idea of the regional as being locked by this geographical constraint that we used to have, and to see how we can now no longer need to see the global and the local as being in opposition, but really as something that can be enriched by the interaction of both. So that's really the site plan. The library sat at the bottom of the kind of site at one corner, which also was a kind of route to go to all the playgrounds around that area for the kids. And these are just kind of routes that the kids used to take to go to these playgrounds. What we were then doing is imagining the library as being this kind of junction where kids could both move through and also walk above when they went to these playgrounds. And it generally became a lot more tactile for the kids to engage with. The building touches the ground only at 5 places, and it's built as a construction system that uses 3 layers of brick tile, and there's no RCC except for the foundations. We did the first mock-ups on site, and they worked fine. But the big question was, how do you build a project like this, which requires complex formwork, which is extremely expensive? I mean, to do a curved formwork for a structure like this would be beyond the budget that we had for the project. We then actually worked an entire system of the formwork using local rebar that the contractor was going to use to construct a slab in another project. And we used that to lay the first layer of tiles. Post the first layer setting, we actually removed all the rebar, and the rebar was used by the contractor to then cast another slab in another project. So there was 0 cost of formwork. And that's the project after the formwork rebar was removed. It's about 150 feet long, 25 feet wide, and 4.5 inches thick. And it's a kind of landscape that you can walk on. The interior, since it's a compression structure, you can't really have any upthrust. So everything is off the ground. So you can see the fans in that space as well are parliamentary fans that are kind of designed around a stand from the ground. And the window profiles are styrated because of the fact that with the styration, they become stronger. If I was doing straight windows, they would be much thicker sections and hence more expensive. The top part of the window above the transom is completely made out of mesh. So it allows for air to move through again. The temperatures inside here during the summers are at least 5 to 6 degrees cooler than they are outside. And these are just some images of the kids using the space. Yeah, that's the final project. Again, speaking of context, and this is one of the toughest projects that we worked on because it was a project that was a art residency project for a client that started a year before COVID, shut down during COVID completely, and then began again after. And it's actually a site that's located in the south of the country. It's right next to India's largest steel plant, the site that we had was extremely flat, barren, had no site features at all. And you're often wondering, how do you build in sites like this where there doesn't seem to be an immediate context to respond to, right? So it's a green field in a very strange way. But yet the site is located in a part that used to be an ancient kingdom of Vijayanagar. It's been in the news a lot lately in India because of the fact that it's one of the kind of touch points that a lot of the political parties use now. And what survives today of this kingdom is this beautiful set of ruins in this idyllic landscape of rolling hills, all kind of made by this the flow of the Tungabhadra river that finds its way through this entire riverine landscape. And so this is just about 50 kilometers away from our site, and we thought maybe this would be a means for us to actually build the narrative of the project. And what we were then kind of also starting to see is that it's not just about the ruins, and the ruins are as evocative as they are, primarily because of the kind of landscape that they're situated in. And so we then started thinking about the idea of the landscape becoming, in some sense, a generator of the project. A lot of these moments of encounter that we had within that landscape was something that eventually became an impetus for us to develop the language of the project itself. So it was a kind of transference of this idea of that light aural landscape on our site, and to develop the architecture as almost these boulders that sat between the flow of people moving through the artist residency project. So it in some sense took from that undulating landscape and then kind of produces this entire set of undulating groundscapes that become the Humpy Art Labs. And that in some sense is the network diagram of the project. And it really composes of two parts. Well, there were three parts before COVID, which then finally got cut down to two parts. The one is the kind of workshops for the artists, and the second at the top bit is the residences. And they're all kind of built as a part of the ground plane. While we were kind of drawing these drawings, and we were very kind of excited about building it, we obviously drew up the 500 sections that we needed because of the kind of changing form of the project. We were also constantly thinking about how do you build, again, something with a kind of complex double curve geometry. How do you cast this, for instance? And the way that we actually finally did that was whatever excavation that we were doing for the foundations of the building, we then kind of piled into these mounds on which the actual project was finally cast. So that those are images of the actual casting process, and some of those casts being deshuttered. And so that was another. So you're constantly kind of dealing with contingencies that would entail cost, ability to also kind of develop a certain expertise for craftsmen on the project. So you're looking for solutions that need not necessarily be regular solutions that people would have been used to, and it's also a kind of task sometimes getting that to work. And these are images of that final project. The entire surface, I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but because it's located next to a steel plant, it has a red oxide dust that's produced as a byproduct of the production process. We use the red oxide dust to create a plaster for the building, which gives it that red tinge that you see on the building skin. So it's about lightness, but it's also about shade and weight in some sense. And there are various parts of the project that are also designed to take landscape over time. So there are, because of the fact that this also has a very dry climate, the landscape changes from season to season. And what you see here now is just post-monsoon, and you can see how much more lush it actually becomes once the plants have a chance to grow. These are images of the residential blocks that are designed as these little boulders that sit within a landscape, opening up into courtyards. And finally, deep recessed entrances and openings to allow for light to be filtered as it comes in again, a very, very hot climatic condition. And really this idea of the project then becomes a derivative of not just the site, but also the history of that entire region. And that is a drawing that actually, it's kind of based on the miniature drawing format again, that actually looks at how our project is really a kind of outcome of these suggestions that the light aural landscape of Hampi makes for the project. Another question that we've been asking ourselves is about the city, and like I mentioned earlier, cities in India are extremely contested because of the rate of development and the kind of lack of equitable development within our cities. And while as architects we might design these projects that I've shown, there is also a constant question that you're asking yourself, and as a professional and your role in being able to understand the kind of disparity that you see in the production of built form within our cities, which then kind of leads me to our kind of research interest of decoding Mumbai, which talks about how Mumbai, or any other city for that matter, is seen in India is seen as this kind of formal city, which is produced by a set of bylaws and building codes, and that then produces a certain kind of architecture. And the fact that there's another part of the city that we can call informal, that is almost kind of producing a city as the city needs certain programs that might not be sequenced within the imagination of what the formal regulations can do. There are various ways that people have kind of described this, and they're all very beautiful and evocative. Senate talks about the open city, Rahul about the ephemeral city, maximum city, and so on and so forth. But what they're all trying to kind of capture in some sense is the kind of dynamic nature of the processes that inhabit the spaces that are produced in between the formal city, and whether it is the Six Sigma rated food delivery system that organically emerged as a means to service working class populations, bringing food for them from their homes to their offices every day without making a single error, or the fact that there is cluster theory that you see emerging around in markets, that marketplaces of things varying from waste recycling products of just plastic modules to even jewelry. So within this kind of narrative of the city and the kind of fabric that we actually have, there is a big push from the government to look at affordable housing. And this was talking about where 2 crores is 20 million homes. This is 2022, and there are new numbers that are now put out there. So there is an understanding that there is a massive housing deficit, and that's something that needs to be produced over the next 5 years. And yet what the government produces is this, right? So this is basically 40 stories of houses, 300 square feet per house, buildings set apart by about 15 feet at the maximum. They're also called shake hand buildings because you can literally shake hands across 2 buildings. And you can imagine the kind of light conditions in this. So it was this that prompted our research first to look at the idea of type. What kind of type existed in the country, in the city rather, in Mumbai, for affordable housing that we could study and learn from. And that led to our exhibition called In the Name of Housing. And what we found was there were these incredible models of housing that existed within the city that we had completely forgotten about. And there are like 5 kinds of these housing. And what we wanted to also say that we were not really kind of getting into the narrative of how people describe their lives here, but really looking at metrics to see if we could actually produce a comparative of projects being built today and the way that they were built in the past, to look at circulation space, to look at social space, and to examine these projects primarily from a data point of view. And we found that there were incredible dependencies that came through all of these projects. The fact that they needed to be part of networks, they needed to have systems that were open to change, that shared space was as important as private space, and the fact that these spaces also needed to expand over time as families grew, and the fact that it's not just about the big moves that you make on projects, it's also about the small things, so the details. This, for instance, is a project in Bombay that's built in 1898. It's roughly 3/4 the size of a Manhattan city block. It's owned by one individual, but unlike mixed-use projects that are built today, the city actually doesn't stop at the edge of the building. It actually moves through. So the lines that you see in red at the bottom there are streets that allow you to go from one part of the city to the other. Primarily through the building as it is. And what you see here is fairly innocuous looking building on the outside, but when you actually start moving through it, you get these incredible double height streets with cloth markets on both sides. And on the upper level, there is a kind of podium with courtyards and housing for these shopkeepers. So it's this kind of project that was built in 1898, extremely sophisticated, 2 completely different grids that sit on one on top of the other. A lot of this was prefab and kind of brought here from America, actually. And it's a project that we've kind of forgotten about. Similarly, like I said, it's not just about the big idea in the project like this, but it's also about the small detail. This is a small, very tiny apartment with a 1 meter, 3 feet wide corridor. And this gentleman has actually built a loft in his apartment. But what he's done is also built this little ladder, which is just 2 pieces of wood and 2 hinges that kind of folds out whenever you need to kind of access the loft, and and you can kind of fold it back into the wall. I mean, this would make IKEA proud. I mean, it's really an incredible kind of invention. There are lots of these that exist. I'm not going too much into detail of other things that we found, but yeah, this is one of them. So our next question was, if all of this fantastic fabric existed, then why can't we do stuff like this today? And the answer kept coming back that it's really because of the building code and how regulations actually have started looking at housing being just about square footage, and looked at housing as real estate, not through a kind of livability point of view, which has produced some really incredible projects. Like this one, which we call the Mushroom Tower. It's 5 floors of housing and 10 stories of parking below. The way that works is that you get benefits for providing housing, providing parking, so you get more FSI, but the developer also starts getting more value for apartments that are higher up. So he just keeps building more and more parking, even if it's not needed in that building. So it's really kind of interesting. And what we were then doing through our building code exercise was trying to break that down to understand what are the rules that got us to a point where we are doing things like this. It also then kind of allowed us to go back and look at the meta view of Mumbai and to see the kind of construction that's happening in the city, that there's literally no greenfield. Everything is a redevelopment project, which means breaking down existing buildings and rebuilding with new FSI that you actually are given. And there is a kind of growing understanding that, there's a kind of belief that the problem of housing in Mumbai is the fact that we don't have enough FSI to build with. We are given like 3 FSI to work with. But actually, if you look at all the exemptions that are built into projects, you're already building at something like 12 or 13 FSI or FAR, depending on what you use. The fact that while densities seem to be increasing, the scale of the individual projects seem to be reducing. So they're all getting super dense, but also on super tight plots, which is also completely obliterating the sense of the city in between. So you're pretty much looking at development through the lens of the plot and not of the neighborhood. And the fact is that this only gets further intensified as we start looking at slum redevelopment projects. That would mean that currently about 60% of Mumbai lives on about 9% of Mumbai's land, which has slums. But over time, once the redevelopment happens, the same amount of population is going to live on 3% of Mumbai's land. So, we're really kind of starting to talk about futures of densities in a way that we haven't seen before. And the fact that because of this plot-centered development in the city, what you're eventually doing is living in these kind of archipelagos of residential buildings, get into your parking tower, drive on a freeway to your office building. So you're going from one island of living to one island of work, and the city in between is completely lost. So that interface is no longer an interface that we engage with, and we tend to forget, and just like we did the models of housing from earlier. And lastly, the fact that there is climate change on the anvil. Mumbai lies by the coast. It's an island city, and with rising sea levels, it's kind of anticipated that about 40% of Mumbai would be underwater by 2050. How do we kind of deal with that? So it's questions like this that really, I think, want us to start thinking about the city as the project, but with a focus on housing. And speaking of housing, I'm just going to show another project, 2 projects, and I'll end with that. One is a kind of housing community in Goa, which is again on the western part of India, right by the water, by beaches. It's a very idyllic kind of countryside, Portuguese colony at one point. A lot of the influence is of that housing. What you see on the right-hand side is a kind of drawing of a very famous Goan artist depicting streets of Goa. And that's a drawing of our project, which is actually located right next to a village setting that you see on top. And there is a kind of road, street that connects the village, which we bring into our project. And you can see how that, while our development is really dense, but that development then allows for us to extend the idea of the street, the village street, into our project and becomes making it a kind of community space. We're also looking, we also regraded the site so that what the low-lying area that was in the middle then goes onto the periphery. So you're able to build on higher ground, but you're still able to let the site act as a kind of a receptor of runoff during the monsoons. And then, of course, the form of the buildings allows you to kind of create these visuals to the skies. And then the module of the house itself and the variated section creates a kind of fabric that has a sense of an organic quality of the village and not just a built-out housing project. And this is an image that actually kind of points out that our development at the bottom here and the village on the top left. And these are images of the housing itself and of that street, and how all the public programs actually, within the house, the living rooms and the dining rooms actually front the street, and the balka or the entrance portico then becomes a point of engagement for all the residents to have that sense of community and engagement with each other. The material that we are using here is a local stone, basalt, and clay tiles for the roofing. This project is a competition that we were finalists for last year. This was ICON's Initiative 99 international competition, looking at using 3D printing for production. We've been working with recycled waste 3D printing in India for the past year and a half. And it seemed like an interesting idea for us to work on. And this is something that we had been developing as kind of wall formats that would become, that would be structural, obviously, but would also have self-patterning on it. But this was a separate exercise. And then this was really the kind of project that we were working on for ICON, for the ICON Initiative 99. It was a project that we were supposed to kind of produce 3 houses as a prototype to build on a site in Austin, in Texas. And what we were trying to do was trying to look at a kind of a format that would allow us to generate common walls that would also have, in some sense, would reduce costs, but also create this kind of tight structure that would give us more print. So at the bottom on the right, you can see that more print quality on the same bed, intensity on the same bed. And these are just some images of that, and the fact that the corbel kind of towards the top then frames the skylight to allow for light to come in. There are, again, screens that allow for light and privacy to happen. And we wanted to minimize the amount of roof that you would do as a flat roof, and everything, the corbelling is kind of an offset of the capacity of the machine and its ability to produce structural integrity through that kind of format. And the last section really is about the second hat that I wear as Dean of CEPT. And the fact that one is constantly kind of questioning what is the role of education in producing practitioners, and the fact that India, as you might know, sits as a part of the Indian subcontinent, which has countries like Bangladesh, for instance, that through the specter of Louis Kahn and his influence have produced an entire generation of architects that do work with an incredibly beautiful singular voice. Again, if you were to look at Sri Lanka, which is also similar, and with the influence of Geoffrey Bawa and the tropical modernist idiom, they again produce work that speaks of continuity from Bawa's work until now. And it is hence a little strange that within India, where we have Kanvinde, Korea, Doshi, and Reval, who produce such incredibly diverse work in this kind of reductive enterprise of trying to put this in a neat container of the regionalist project, we've also lost a lot of the nuance that their work had. And I think our effort now, both in academia and as professionals, is maybe to kind of start looking at start producing let's say a theory or a thesis about what that nuance actually means, given the fact that it produces work that you see here that doesn't even look like it's a part of the same region, forget about the same country. So it's incredible that, that's the first project up on the left is from the south. The project, let's say the two projects in the middle, one is from the east, the other one's from the west. So it's just an incredible variety of work that's produced that would be very difficult for us to explain as a singular image. And this, in some sense, brings me back to the idea of the title of the essay, Is There an Indian Way of Thinking? Which A.K. Ramanujan actually proposes as a thesis, where he says that by emphasizing on each word differently in the title, you can reframe the question. So when he talks about, is there an Indian way of thinking, he's also asking simultaneously, was there ever an Indian way of thinking? When he talks about, is there an Indian way, he's also simultaneously asking if that's a singular thing, and so on and so forth. But I think what Ramanujan here kind of points to, in some sense, is the fact that everything in India is subjective. There is an adage, a very famous adage, which says that if you believe something about India, exactly the opposite is also true. And it's this kind of contradiction that this kind of incredible variety produces. And that's really what we are trying to kind of think about. And in my role as Dean of CEPT University, we have 5 departments that include architecture, of course, design, urban management, planning, and technology. And it's really a kind of ecosystem that looks to development as its kind of core competency. And while I am the Dean of the Faculty of Architecture, we have been working on studios, on programs that are interdisciplinary, that are working with the Faculty of Technology. So we are constantly working with other departments to be able to make our students more equipped to deal with the actual world of practice, where you're also working with these incredibly varied disciplines to produce a project finally. In the Faculty of Architecture itself, we have the bachelor's program, and master's, and a kind of PhD, a doctoral program as well. The undergrad program actually works with this idea of the studio unit. So we offer about 40 studios in the undergrad program every semester. And these vary from looking at doing full scale, in this case on the left-hand side, a full-scale paper-mache mock-up of a kind of form-finding project. On the right-hand side, we look at traditional skills of hand drawing, but look at the section as a means to produce a building. We're also simultaneously working with people from other disciplines. So on the left-hand side, that entire project is a joint studio that's offered by an architect and a filmmaker. And what you're kind of looking at are speculative scapes of a future world. The one on the right is a project that's done by Subin that actually looks at scale and the idea that multi-scalar operations could also produce different effects and different inhabitations. In this case, looking at infrastructure, rural infrastructure on the left, and infrastructure of the cities and metro stations, and its kind of impact on the kind of production of precincts in the city. And then our master's programs, which looks at the incredible heritage that we have, both from the idea of conservation, but also from the idea of intervention. How do you actually document, how do you legislate, and how do you actually advocate these kind of projects? In the Masters of Landscape program, we are looking at, of course, climate change, but also looking at natural preserves, so forests, water systems, and also traditional knowledge systems, and as to how these have been dealt with natively. In the history and research program, we tend to look at existing landscapes, not just of built form, but also processes, to allow for students to actually explore both the logic, but also the presentation of what their investigations actually produced, a kind of an archaeology of sorts. And in the case of our interior design program, it's actually one of the most popular programs in our in our faculty, and it's also one of the few masters of interior design programs in the country. There is the interior renovation industry in India is about valued at about $500 billion, and it's really a kind of massive project. So there is a huge demand for this that we are trying to kind of work with in terms of material, in terms of projection of technology, how do you look at fit outs, and so on and so forth. The kind of housing design program, like I mentioned, housing is an extremely important touchstone, both as a kind of political, but also as a kind of social enterprise. So we have a Master of Housing program that specifically looks at the production of housing, both through the lens of technology, as well as the lens of type. Then lastly, a kind of Masters of Architectural Tectonics program, where we look at the idea that mid-career professionals often need experience with ways to put buildings together, not in a conceptual sense, but also in a kind of pragmatic, detail-oriented format, and this program actually kind of services exactly that. So I'm just going to end with some of these values and questions that I spoke about, and how these values point to the idea of frugality, diversity, appropriate technology, projecting history, and the fact that there needs to be a kind of synergy between these various disciplines that operate within the production of the built environment. Thank you. And that, in my sense, is the Indian way of thinking. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really amazing. I was in India about a year ago, and I have to say this is your mix of the old and the new and the technology and invention. It's very Indian, and it's incredible. It was lovely. We have time for a couple of questions. Does anyone have something that they'd like to ask? Yeah.
Yeah, hello again. Thank you so much. Wonderful projects, really.
Thank you.
Like whenever I hear about India, it's like abundance. That's the keyword comes to my mind, which is true.
There's also schizophrenia, but I mean, that's...
Yeah. I was wondering if you have any manifesto in your studio or firm, the way that, okay, you want to focus on this type of projects, or there are some projects that you don't want to touch or something, as a way to guide your firm in the long term, and also talk about a little bit about the design process. We saw the results and some diagrams, but is there any specific design process in your firm?
Yeah, I think that those are both excellent questions. I think one of the things that defines our processes, design processes, is the fact that they're always investigative, in a sense that we don't really know what the project's going to be. And it's something that we work through. So it's not a sketch that I make that becomes a project. It's usually a lot of conversations that kind of produce a certain direction. But it's also the fun in the entire project is finding out something new, at the end of it, a discovery. And I think, the J1 project, which was the first one that we kind of, that I showed, which had the inverted roofs that you could look out into. So the person who actually commissioned the project was this Czechoslovakian monk who raised funding for it. And he was interested in being able to teach Buddhist yogic practices to the kids in that area, and so on and so forth. So there were these mud rolls that we had done for insulation. There were birds that had actually come in and made nests inside. So the guy who kind of ran the space, complained to the guy when I was there as well, saying that, it's been 2 years now, and these birds have started making nests inside, and it's not working and stuff like that. So he just kind of looked back at him and said, why it's not working? It's nature taking over the building again. It's absolutely fine. And for me, I didn't really think about that because I was really trying to think about solutions that we would have to kind of make for that. And for me, that showed an entire different way of looking at the life of the building and its kind of occupancy. So as far as the manifesto goes, I think we're still looking for one because it's, like I said, that it's really a kind of search. And as far as projects that we don't touch, no, in fact, I want to work on all kinds of projects. Like for instance, the Indian Masters Korea, Doshi, Reval never did developer work. And I think our cities are poorer for that. And I think if we do not engage with that typology, of course we can fail, but if we don't engage, I think that's already a battle lost. So yeah, we are working on that. And of course, you don't get projects within Mumbai. You won't get a tower to do in Mumbai very easily. It's extremely contested real estate, right? So it's only now after, whatever, 15 years of practice that we are starting to do work in the city, and we'll see what happens once it's built. Yeah.
Hello. So thanks again for the inspiring projects. So after your lectures, I have raised like some few questions. So the way you did it was to create like a new things with the traditional context. So what are the like challenges that you had to face in terms of from your clients for projects?
Again, especially for the temple projects, those were always highly contested, primarily because temple, any kind of religious building in your mind is kind of ossified over centuries of a particular image of what that building needs to be. So when you're starting to question that, there was a lot of pushback. But what's worked for us is rather than go to the users or the villagers with the final project, we've always gone incrementally, just taking smaller steps and showing them the steps that we were taking. So when they finally see that entire project, they've already bought in at an earlier stage. So they understand the logic of getting to where we got to finally. And I think that has been a great kind of help. There's also, while logic is one aspect, what you're also kind of working with is aspiration. A lot of the projects, especially the affordable housing projects that we are working on, deal with this idea that what was old is not necessarily progressive or futuristic. And they aspire to be in a glass building, right? So that's really the big challenge. How do you mitigate aspiration? The rest of it is much easier to work with. New ways of looking at form or material, all that is much easier because there is a kind of logic to that. But aspiration is a much tougher thing that we've had to kind of tackle. That's the toughest part that I've had to deal with.
Like any other feedback on budgeting? Because
Sorry?
On the budget, like do they
Budget.
have like a counter feedbacks on when you propose conventional and it's going to be costly to build?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it cannot be more costly to build because the minute if cost is a touch point, the project is over. You're not going to go forward, right? So I think most of these projects end up working with frugality as a start point. That you've got to do this, let's say, complex vault, but you can't spend, on the formwork for it. So what do you do next? So then you use the earth, you use rebar that is reused again. So you're able to find solutions because of the need to be frugal, right? And I think it's a good thing, quite frankly. I mean, with unlimited budgets, I think that would have been much more difficult to do. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I appreciate the ownership that you take as an architect in that, if you don't have the budget, then you'll find, as you just said, ways to, not sacrifice the form or the material. Well, you'll use what you have to fulfill the objective kind of thing. I also appreciate that, you're not kind of blaming a lack of skilled labor And instead, you'll create the skills or tools or processes needed so that, again, the objective can be fulfilled. I thought that was a really interesting and inspirational approach to architecture that I don't see too much in the professional world. So my question is just, I guess, where did you learn that mentality, and or what's the story behind you implementing that and putting it into practice?
I was mentioning earlier, I actually went to SIAC for a semester and a half, 2 semesters, and I dropped out. I went back to India. Well, the reason why I dropped out of SIAC was at that point I didn't I wasn't really taken in by, I mean, the formal aspects of the work that we were doing was fantastic, but it was too whimsical for me. Maybe it's also a cultural thing that you want to see a reason why you're using a certain material in the way that you're using it, or a reason for doing things, because maybe it's the fact that we grew up in a kind of quasi-socialist oriented democracy, where access to things wasn't easy. So you make the best of what you have, and any overuse of or over-specification of any kind seemed to be a waste. So maybe it comes from that in some sense, but I'm only kind of analyzing myself now. But I think in a country like India, where half the population, just because of birth, doesn't have the same access to, let's say, education that you do, it's just not ethical in my view to then look at doing things in a particular way just because you deem it as a kind of author or a catharsis of sorts, right? I mean, I don't think within India we are at a place where we can take that kind of liberty, where half or more than half our population doesn't have the freedom of choice as well, because of the fact that there aren't enough economic means. So I think it also comes from that aspect, that growing up in that kind of environment probably kind of pushes you there. And though the profession itself doesn't make you conscious, well, our training within our schools doesn't make you conscious of that. But that's a problem, I think, that you get from lived experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that here there's a huge mindset that it's a very product-based kind of thing, or it can be, unless you very purposefully go out of your way to think of solutions that are outside of products that are already pre-packaged, pre-set kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, I really appreciate that approach, and
thank you.
Inspirational again. Thank you.
Ready to start our long meeting?
I think that's something.
Thank you for the presentation. So one of the questions I had, which you kind of answered, but maybe you can elaborate more, would be, you've mentioned you've worked with local people, you've worked with the monk you mentioned, but I wanted to know more about the client and people you've dealt with that encouraged you to kind of go out of your way and kind of create the things that you have. And the second question I have, which is specifically for that freeform library, is I have a little bit of background in structural, so when I was looking at that, I was like, I'm sure you had some conversation with the structural engineer and how that conversation went. And, when I see that, it's like, initial thought would be, oh, is that possible, right? So, like, I just wanted to see how that conversation went, right, and kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, so it's the library. I mean, actually, each of these projects can be a 1-hour lecture by themselves. But the library specifically, like I said, RhinoVolt had just come out. I didn't know Philippe and the block research group that actually puts RhinoVolt out. I didn't know them at all, and we were using a beta version of the software to calculate the kind of structural stability of the Volt itself. And it seemed to work. We then started doing scalar mockups as well to see if it kind of performed. We obviously were testing the kind of 3-layer sandwich of the brick tile every mockup that we did as well, for crush loads, compression strength, etc. But I think after a certain point, the structural engineer who was working on the project had no say in the way that we were working on the shell. And the only thing that he designed were the foundations. The rest of it was us working on Rhino World. And there was just out of the blue that Philippe got in touch saying that, I've heard that the largest Rhino Volt building has been built somewhere in rural Maharashtra, and it's done by you guys, and you've used Rhino Volt. Could you tell me more about it? And so basically, I think it was also a little bit of naivety that you were kind of going by impulse and complete faith in the software in some sense. But the rest of it was also a lot of, let's say, management with the other technicians involved in the project and both the contractor to figure out how to get the laying of the tile correctly. How do you get the junction between the volt and the foundations to work? Does that need to be a junction that has a kind of rubberized end so that it takes some kind of movement loads, or does it need to be fixed? Things like that. So we were constantly kind of going back and forth, working both on the engineering as well as the architecture. The structure engineer was only validating the foundations. The rest of it was really just us working on it. And as far as the client question goes, I think what has really worked for us is often working with clients and telling them that, yes, we have this idea. And if they ask us a question to which we don't have an answer, we actually tell them we don't have an answer, but we will find out during the process of design. So I think once we are that kind of open with them, we often find that they kind of also believe a lot more in what we're trying to do and how we'll manage to do it. So yeah.
Great projects.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we should call the evening to a close, and thank you. It's been a great honor to have you here and to close out our series of lectures. Thank you. I hope we'll see you all next Friday at our year-end show. So have a good long weekend, and thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.